So obviously this was Ben's question here. The first component of his question was about specificity and variability. And what he's referring to there is like, Scotty, when you think of specificity, what comes to your mind?
Oh, I just think of squat bench dead and the whole West Side thing and just that argument. That's just where my brain goes immediately.
Right. Okay. And Cooper, what about you when you think of specificity? What do you think?
I think, yeah, like as a powerlifter, yeah, like your squat, bench, and deadlift, like specific lifts for that sport, I guess.
Right. Okay. So is it just powerlifters that have specificity, or?
Oh no, like I guess CrossFit, strongman, all those Olympic lifting, all
Right.
those.
So if you were a CrossFitter, what would specificity mean as a CrossFitter? Like, there's no right or wrong answer. You just shoot something from the hip, man.
I guess I don't know what's a CrossFit workout look like. To be honest, I've never really even done a CrossFit workout. To be honest.
No, that's fine. So specificity is not actually just for a particular group of people or a particular type of training style. Specificity is a training principle, one of several. Arguably, probably the most important principle because it is the one that drives the outcome. Okay, so specificity drives the outcome. So his question in turn was, what is, essentially, when you think of a powerlifter, you think of just FBD all the fucking time. Right, that is super specific all the time. Now, variability sits on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. So let's say, for example, we've got a powerlifter doing SBD being super specific. Variability, or something that would be qualified as variable for that lifter, would be something that requires rotational ability. You know what I mean? Maybe some sort of like abdominal training, maybe running even, maybe throwing, hopping, shit like that. Things that are on the completely opposite end of the spectrum, but I'll give you guys a bit more of an insight as we move forward. So that was the first one, idea of specificity and variability. When should we kind of get away from the other and move towards the other, essentially? So it's quite important for everyone to pretty understand. The second one there was obviously like my ideas behind volume and how much volume should different training styles, different training phases have, and that sort of stuff. And then he was asking me, how do I manage my own routine from exercise to exercise, i.e. asking me how I actually program for other people and stuff like that. So when we look at specificity, like I was saying before, let me just move. How do I make this? Sorry, guys. There we go. Cool. So specificity, like I said before, it's a training principle, and every single athletic endeavor, it can be powerlifting, it can be weightlifting, it can be CrossFit, it can be running, it can be what have you. They all have what's called specificity. And so that's the training principle itself. So the more that you do that thing that you're trying to get better at, that you're trying to compete in or what have you, that's going to be specific in nature. Now, when it comes to specificity, it's made up of three individual variables primarily, right? Those three variables that make up specificity is going to be the task at hand. So as a powerlifter, the SBD is the task, okay? So they got to go up and platform, they got to show up on the SBD. So that is their task. The dosage is then going to be how much time are we spending doing those things, all right? And then the struggle is going to be, what is it that they need to work on most? For a powerlifter, it could be weak points, sticking points, what have you. For a runner, it could be their ability to sustain prolonged periods of, cardiac output, etc., like that. Now, what we're trying to do with specificity is we're trying to merge all of those three variables into one, and it's called integration. So specificity is trying to integrate each one of those three variables. When we integrate those three variables, we end up in the center here, and that's called integration. So let's make this a little bit more exemplified. A powerlifter, okay? Deadlift. Cooper, what's something you might struggle in a deadlift?
Lockout.
Lockout. Okay, so we've got the task deadlift, we've got the lockout as the struggle. And what could we do to make the lockout a little bit more fruitful and to work on it? let's just take a common example that people still assume, and it's going to be a rack pull, all right, pulling from the shins essentially. So now we've taken the task, we've taken the struggle, we've taken the dosage, and we're going to apply the rack pull into your training, right? We're going to end up in this midpoint here where we've rationalized, we're justified why we're doing a particular thing, and for that reason, it is specific to you. Okay, essentially that's what specificity is. A squat, bench press, or deadlift isn't inherently specific to the powerlifter, right? It's how much volume of the squat, bench, and deadlift, how much weight on the bar of the squat, bench, and deadlift. That's going to be more specific. So if we take like a bench press, 3 by 15, how specific is that compared to a top single and a bench press? Justin?
No.
Not very specific. Not very specific whatsoever. So the bench press doesn't automatically get qualified as task specific to the powerlifter because it's not the case. What's task specific is high loads, low volumes, potentially mod to a high frequency. That's going to be specific bench pressing to the powerlifter. So do you guys kind of see how that might work, where we're trying to interlink all those variables to make something specific for the person? Are there any questions with that? Okay. When I look at specificity, I actually try to look at specificity in a bit of a broader lens. And what I wrote here was an extended sagittalized state. We've probably spoken about it in previous calls. And what that refers to, Scotty, what does a powerlifter look like from a skeletal perspective? Do you remember that one?
Yeah, they're pretty kind of ribcage flared, kind of extended and rolled back.
Right, so shoulders back sort of thing, rib cage extended, flared, upper back extended, all that kind of stuff. We see like things happening at the pelvis, at the feet, and whatever else. How good is a powerlifter at moving side to side, Cooper?
Not very.
Not very. Why not?
They're stiff, I guess. I think that's the
stiff
word you normally.
Right, they're stiff as fuck. Justin, how good are you at balancing on one leg?
Not very good.
All right, so we can now see that a powerlifter, and they're probably the best example because they literally live in an extended sagittalized state where they're doing everything bilaterally, or most things bilaterally, i.e. both hands on the ground, both hands on an implement, both hands on the ground, for example, and they're doing things in a way that's going to promote this particular representation of the body and the structure, right? As a result of that, they're spending a lot of time in this sagittalized state. As a result of that, they're losing their ability to do pretty much everything else. So for me, specificity is like anything that's going to put someone in an extended sagittalized state. That to me is going to be like specific as fuck for the power lifter. Mudge, if we had someone who wasn't a power lifter, say they were we'll just call them a tactical athlete, what could be specificity for the tactical athlete?
So are you talking about the position that they require?
Potentially.
Yeah. So in they need to be able to access both positions. They need to be able to flex, but also extend. They also need to be able to rotate.
Right. They need to access the transverse, the frontal, and the sagittal plane pretty equally because the demands of their task require all of those things. So
sorry,
Dennis,
I was going to say, and the best example for everyone to kind of think about it is you can probably use yourself, or you've probably watched someone who's a powerlifter or even a weightlifter who's very stiff, and you watch them run and they look like a brick and their hands aren't really moving or rotating. And then you watch someone who's efficient in running, you can actually see them start to rotate and stuff. And so that's kind of in my head, our picture. I just watch someone run or move and I'm like, this person is very stiff. They're probably not going to be the best for this kind of task that they want to do.
Right. And the reason why specificity, even though I said specificity is a training principle, the reason why it applies so heavily on, say, strength athletes or powerlifters is because movement variability, which was the second part of Ben's question, which I said was on the opposite end of the scale, movement variability pretty much means your ability to adapt to changing circumstances. So someone who's in an extended sagittalized state, right, cannot adapt to any of those circumstances. So say we take a powerlifter, we put them on the AFL oval, their ability to rotate, cut, weave, dodge, jump, run is going to be significantly lessened. So specificity from my end, this is of course me answering it for Ben. Specificity on my end is not always just about the task and the thing that we're doing in the gym. It's more or less like the skeletal representation that this person has, purely because variability is their ability to do pretty much everything else. Okay. If we took the squat as an example, and we're still talking about specificity here, I was talking about integration here, right? And here's another way of us looking at it. It's obviously a bit of a sliding scale. And on the far left, we have something that's very, very different. And on the far right, we pretty much have the task for the powerlifter. So we look at the competition squat, and we're just going to go a low bar squat. Okay. As we kind of move down the scale to things that are less specific in nature, we're going to look at something like this. Competition squat, less specific, is going to be a competition derivative, right? So again, Cooper, I'll give you a question, right? If you do a 3-second tempo low bar squat, how specific is that to the low bar squat at comp?
I guess it is, but it isn't. Yeah.
What wouldn't be specific about it?
Well, it's tempo. It's slower than what you'd do at a comp.
So what does that ultimately mean? Because it's slower, what does that ultimately mean to the weight on the bar?
Oh, yeah, he's going to have less weight on the bar, yeah.
Right. So already just by doing that, we go, hang on, it's a low bar squat. We're doing the same thing, bilateral sagittal exercise, pretty much doing the low bar squat, which is the most specific thing. Of course it's specific. No, it's not, right? Because we've got to think back to this variable here of dosage, of intensity and volume and time. All of these things comprised make up the specific thing. So then we have a tempo low bar squat, which is just one level down from full specificity, if you will. Then we have a derivative squat, right? Scotty, if we're doing a safety bar squat, how specific is that to a competition low bar squat?
Not very specific.
What would make it? I mean, what components of the safety bar squat would make it specific?
What do you mean? Sorry.
So what components of the safety bar? So you've got a safety bar on your back and you're doing it.
Oh, yeah. So, well, it's
What
a
about
squat
it?
pattern. It's a hip and a bend.
Right.
Free weight. It can be pretty heavy.
Right. Pretty heavy. Yeah, right. So it's still fucking loadable. You still got 2 feet on the ground. You're still doing squat mechanics. There's a bar on your shoulders. It's kind of specific, but it's also very, very not very specific, right? Because generally speaking, the shape that your body is going to create around the safety bar is going to look different, again, from the low bar squat. The total load on the safety bar, even though the safety bar is not limiting in how much load you can use, it's still extremely loadable, is still going to mean that you're going to use far less weight. So it's another step down yet again from specificity. And then we have a squat machine. Mudge, how specific is a hack squat to a low bar squat?
Not very specific.
Why?
Because a squat machine is very much external stability, whereas any of those variants beforehand rely on internal stability.
That's a fucking good one. The squat machine is entirely, or not entirely, but I'm going to say 99% externally stabilized. You're still doing a squat pattern. It's fucking loadable though. It's loadable. But yeah, it definitely like decreases the internal stability demand, which makes it far less specific. And then of course we have the muscular bias. Like if we're doing leg extensions, there is a degree of knee bending that it, mimics that the low bar squat would do. Quads stronger would make the low bar squat better over the long run. But it's, as you can see, like it's far on the opposite side. But the idea behind all of these is like I'm trying to say here, specificity isn't just one singular thing. There's degrees of specificity in absolutely everything. But when we merge the task, the dosage, and the struggles, we merge all those three things together. That's when we get specificity. So all of these share one quality, and that is integration to specificity. So they all fit essentially all of these to make that very, very specific thing in the center. Cool. Does that make sense? I don't have any questions.
I've got a question. You mentioned before for the rack pull that people use it for a lockout. What would you use to kind of address that with your model there that you just explained before?
I would continue deadlifting, and I would change their position. I don't know if you're like prompting me here or anything, but
No, I'm
essentially
not
like
prompting. I'm just, it's literally a curious question.
yeah. So I made a post just recently about early knees and delaying knee extension in the deadlift. In effect, what we see is when people do a conventional sumo and they do like a really quick knee lockout, then the hip lockout or the finish of the lift just makes it much, much harder. So the idea is to delay how quickly we lock the knees out. If you think of it this way, we pull a deadlift off the ground, the knees go back and they lock out. Well, then the hip has so much more torque being placed upon it, right? It's capable of it, but it's got to do more work than what it fucking needs to. Right, but if we're like delay knee extension, we're then sharing that range of motion between the knees and the hips alike so that things can happen harmoniously, i.e. achieve the lockout. So it'd be a case of tempo deadlifts, like tempo descending deadlifts or pause deadlifts, but I wouldn't be trying to like just bias rack pulls or hip thrusts or whatever else, right? That make sense?
Yep.
Cool. Like I was saying before then, variability starts to look like the complete opposite end of specificity. And that is your ability to adapt to changing demands. Okay. When we look at variability, there's going to be two variables that comprise, when we look at variability, this is like the entire spectrum essentially. We've got on one side rigidity, like we were just talking about, like things that are, I guess, extended sagittalized state. Coops, when I say extended sagittalized state, does that make sense to you now?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So that sagittalized state is a pretty rigid human, very rigid human. Now, chaos on the complete opposite end would look like something or someone who has, say, hypermobility. All right. Now, variability isn't trying to get someone from rigidity to a chaotic environment, because then we're going to lose all qualities that we've actually built here in this stage if we go all the way here. We've lost all those qualities. Alternatively, if we go from here straight to here, we're not going to possess enough qualities to be this. So variability is actually like this sweet midpoint where if we take the powerlifter who is super fucking rigid and we want them in an off season to, I guess, feel a little bit better, move a little bit better, then we're going to start to have the idea of variability and what that means. Scotty, when you think of variability, what comes to your mind?
I guess just the how far away a movement is from resembling whatever we like the task or the goal, so like that continuum you put up before, something that is further down the squat machine / muscular biased end rather than something that kind of replicates or resembles a squat or whatever we're trying to do.
Right. So what we're looking at with these things is that, in fact, they do hold a degree of specificity. Remember how we're talking about integration? So even though the squat machine and the muscular bias at this instance share very little resemblance to the actual task, there are integrative qualities that they both possess that are kind of specific to the task. So those things that you're mentioning aren't exactly part of variability. Justin, in your experience with your training, do you have anything that you might think has been a phase of variability or restoration of some sort, or doing things that are less specific? And what was it that you were doing?
No, maybe getting biceps added in on bench day to take away from that repetitive move, like pushing movement, to change up instead of, yeah.
So biceps on a bench day.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. That could absolutely be a form of variability. It's like we're doing the opposite. Okay. Like, the bench press, elbow extension, biceps, elbow flexion. We're doing the opposite movement. I don't know if I'd still quantify that as bench press, but let's kind of we'll go into the next slide in a second. We'll talk about that one. But does anyone have any questions with this slide in terms of variability? Mudge, or Louis, actually, is this anything different to what you know as variability?
No, I think what you and I spoke about this like spectrum of rigidity versus chaos at some point, and it's like giving them, I guess, say one option that allows them to complete the task that they need to complete, and that's it. And then it's on the other end of the spectrum of giving them more options of their actual movement ability.
Right. When we then look at this little continuum here as the powerlifter, like I said, I'm using powerlifter because they're the perfect example of people that just suck at everything else. We've then got this little spectrum here again. Now, on the far left side, we're looking at someone who is relatively rigid, and then we're moving towards not chaos, but we're moving towards the center line. All right, so this spectrum is going from here to the center. Okay, it's not going from here to here. So the powerlifter in this instance, rigidity would be like things in the sagittal plane, bench press, deadlifts, squats, and all the accessories that come with it. Bilateral exercises primarily. Once you go into unilateral, things start to look a little bit more frontal plane. Okay. So how specific is a Bulgarian split squat to a powerlifter?
Not very, no.
Right. There is a degree of integration that the split squat would have. I mean, it's a knee and hip dominant exercise, right? It mimics like one side of the body doing a squat pattern. There are some things that are happening. It's training the glutes, the adductors, and the quads and the hamstrings to a little degree. But as soon as we step on one foot, there are other things that are happening on our body, i.e. muscles having to operate in a particular way to hold us in that position. And the way that those muscles are working and what they're doing, they don't do that when we're actually got two feet on the ground. So by that, we're then looking at a massive decrease in specificity by shifting onto one leg and doing unilateral stuff, or one hand, right? Then we're going to frontal plane. If you think of, Scotty, you think of like an NRL player has to do like a dodge or something, or a dummy. Are they moving front or back, or are they moving side to side?
Side to side.
Side to side, right? And how much do front rowers move side to side? Or they move front and back?
More so, I think so.
What's that? Sorry.
I think they're more forward backwards than
Right. Front rowers are the ones that don't move side to side. They move forwards and backs because that's what their job is. Like, go forward, put that person down, and then jog backwards. Whereas everyone else almost has to go side to side. So we can see now that, like, that big, stiff, rigid person has an inability to move side to side. So doing things that are going to promote side to side movement in the frontal plane is going to be taking them a little bit closer towards, variability, I guess. We then have, we take one step further and we go the transverse plane. Justin, how good do you reckon a powerlifter could pitch a baseball?
Nah, not very good. I don't think their shoulders would be any good at it.
No, their shoulders would be all right. I mean, they'd come through with a fucking high degree of force, but they'd have a hard time rotating. They'd have a hard time accessing a position, as they're winding up the pitch and then letting go of the ball as well. They'd have a hard time going through that full spectrum of rotational movement required to actually produce more force into that throw. They'd literally be, quote unquote, muscling it because they haven't got the capacity to rotate. So now we're going from sagittal, we're going to frontal, now we're going to transverse. Can you see how this is like now promoting more movement option, more adaptability to that person?
Yeah.
Then we look at something called the flexion bias. So, and by the way, if you were to take someone from, the highly specific sagittal plane all the way to, as variable as possible, you don't need to move in this particular sequence. And you wouldn't move in this particular sequence. It's highly likely that you'd probably have all of these in the mix at the one time. But I think I just wanted to kind of have it here as an order that would make more sense. Like, this cardio bit would be much more, I guess, fruitful if someone was to be a little bit more flexion biased. And if they were more flexion biased, they'd probably have more transverse plane bias, et cetera, et cetera. But deflection bias, Cooper, what's the position that we find powerlifters in primarily?
Up and back.
That fucking up and back. And what's flexion bias?
Up and back.
Flexion bias is the opposite side. So extension bias is the powerlifter. Flexion bias is a little bit more of like an upper back rounding. I'm just going to call it more of a neutral state, right? Not the stiff powerlifter. But the flexion bias are people who what's a sport? And you guys might not be thinking of it straight away. Mudge, give me a sport that is
I know
very.
this answer.
No, you don't.
Yeah, a diver.
No. What? No. That's a great answer though. What's a sport that requires flexion bias, also requires transverse plane and frontal plane competencies to high degrees?
Like a gymnast?
Yeah, I guess so, but not really. What's another one?
Oh, fuck.
A tennis player.
Yeah, our tennis player's not wrong.
Basketball? No, sorry, not basketball. Baseball?
Yeah, okay. Baseball. Justin, what's a sport that requires more of a flexion bias?
I'm not sure.
Oh, give me one.
Wrestling.
Fantastic. Fucking oath. You got to rotate. Scotty, give me a sport that requires flexion bias.
What about just a fighter, like a UFC fighter?
Dude, yeah, fantastic. Guys, the answer here is that pretty much all fucking sports, unless they are moving just forwards and backwards, all sports require flexion bias. Because all sports have a relatively chaotic environment where they've got to move left and right and potentially rotate as well. You know, even swimming, it looks like it's just going forwards and backwards, but actually swimming, there's reciprocity between the left and the right side of the body happening at all times. They are king of transverse plane. They also king of frontal plane. So like pretty much anyone that's not a strongman, even strongman to a degree might even benefit from some flexion work. But unless you're like, if you're not a strength athlete, like potentially a Olympic weightlifter, a powerlifter or a strongman, then it's like everything else is going to be really, really good, to live in this sort of state here, including the general population. Like the general population want to feel good, look good, move better. If we just give the general population a highly specific sagittal plane bilateral exercise only, they'll get stronger. And it could actually help some people in circumstance just manage gravity a little bit better, which in and of itself could actually make them feel better. But if we just continue hammering them with the SBD and stuff like that, and we're missing all of these fruits, then they're not very adaptable as a human being. All right. Does anyone have anything to add on this one? Nothing. There's obviously trade-offs between specificity and variability. It's like the more specific you are, as we we're just talking about, the less variability that actually is accessible to you. You know what I mean? But on the converse, it's like the more variability we have, the less specificity. So are you guys like, is anyone here like noticing a trend potentially on Instagram of like people saying like, you can run and you can also lift heavy weights? Yeah. Scotty, and Scotty, what's your opinion on that one?
We kind of talked about this in our first call, that, at a certain point, you'll end up either so strong or so absolutely great at both.
Yeah. So I think like the thing to remember with specificity and variability is that although they exist on opposite ends of the spectrum, being completely non-specific does not mean being variable. Right? Because like if we take someone who we've just been talking about as variability and people and an athlete that's more suited to say variability, frontal, transverse, flexion, cardio and stuff like that, if we take that person, so if we take the the fucking AFL player, it's like even an AFL player deserves specificity to a degree, right? In whatever it is that we're trying to do or employ to get them better at the task that they're trying to do. So, but it's like, say we take an AFL player and we want to get them stronger because we just want them to be able to sprint faster. Justin, what are we going to do?
Work on
just
their legs.
work on their legs and maybe squat, right?
Yeah.
And then we want to get them fucking really strong squatting. Okay. So we're going to get pretty specific in terms of what we're trying to do. We're going to squat. We're going to, if they have any struggle points, we'll do a particular type of squat. We're going to dose the squat depending on how much they can actually tolerate and stuff like that. We're actually being quite specific for what we're trying to do. But if then we took that specificity and we just hammered it ad nauseum for a long fucking time, what's then going to happen to that AFL player?
They're going to become more rigid.
They're going to become so much more rigid, and they're going to live in the extensional sagittal state. And so now their variability, the qualities of variability have significantly decreased. Does anyone have anything to add? Nope. Mudge, is anything different from what you know from variability and specificity?
No. Definitely sounds very familiar.
Cool. There's two different ways we can look at like training, because then Ben asked me like, in terms of training and when you should move away from specificity and variability. Like we were just talking about there, it's like if we get a powerlifter and we take the variability approach, we take them away from the things that they're actually really, really good at. But in an off season, we might want to take them towards variability, so to speak, have them feeling a little bit better and moving better. The top-down approach is something like this. And just think of each of these levels as phases of training, right? In this case, we've got 5 phases. Let's just say it's 5 blocks, okay? Now, there's a point at which we actually want them to express the task that they want to be expressing. It could be an AFL player, like actually season starting, a powerlifter getting the platform, what have you. The top-down approach would mean that we'd actually try and organize a bit of a long-term projection as to how the plan might look from a variability-specific perspective. So, say in June, so what's the 5th month of the year, Justin?
May.
Is it May?
Yeah,
cool. Say at the end of May, the season starts or they're getting on the platform. And then it's like in January, we could probably still do like, a fair bit of cardio, a lot of single leg stuff, single arm stuff. We can rotate all that kind of stuff. Then as we're approaching into February, we might strip some of that, by 10, 20%. Next month, strip another. Next month, strip more.
No, but you can come in.
And then next month, strip more. And then in that final month or whatever, we go hyper specific and we just stay real specific. That's going to give them the opportunity there to actually, express what they need to express. Now, this is obviously very, very simple and straightforward. And it's straightforward because it fucking works, right? It works. But it doesn't need to be this way. People don't need to have specific phases or non-specific phases. From powerlifting perspective, Justin, you might know them as like a volume phase, a maintenance phase, an intensification phase, a peaking phase, right?
Yeah.
Right. So these are phases, and essentially like these could be all different phases here, right? So the maintenance phase would be like down here, and then volume, then intensification, then peaking, right? It doesn't have to be that way though. So that's called the top-down approach, where we have like a broad perspective of it. The next one, we can go a bottoms-up approach. Mudge, what's a bottoms-up approach?
When in regards to
training.
I guess bottoms-up approach, because the one before you just explained was very specific in nature, like as in there's set phases that you have to go through. Right. So a bottom-up approach to me would be what we call microdosing. So I would pick certain things I bias, certain qualities, and then I'll microdose those qualities while still drip feeding those other qualities. And as I go through my programming, the quality that I've kind of downplayed in this phase will come the bias. The one that I just did gets downplayed, so we still exposing the athlete to that thing, and I move through those things. That's how I'm interpreting a bottom-up approach.
Fantastic. That is exactly what bottoms up is. It's Mladen's vertical integration, essentially.
Yeah.
Agile periodization. Where if we took those same 5 phases and we took this one right here and the middle one and the green one. Now, in each one of those training phases, we have a little bit of absolutely everything, because you can actually get away with it, right? The whole the whole running and training and lots of zone 2 and lifting weights and, you know, when people are trying to, you know, cross these quote unquote hybrid sort of mentalities into training, you know, essentially they're saying that you can do all of this, and you absolutely can. But the only thing that you have to pay attention in these circumstances is, even though each one of these training phases you can have lifting and cardio and what have you, it needs to be reactive. As in, like, even though you've got them planned out like that, as you're getting towards, like, you know, this very non-specific date where there's like, you've got nothing that you're planning to do in the foreseeable future. And then it's like, oh, actually, like in 5 or 6 months, I actually want to lift the barbell really, really heavily. In this phase, it's like, you might be able to get away with dosing all of them equally, and you might see no decrement in performance in any way. Then as we approach it more and more and more, we might actually want to start to pull back on some of those qualities. You can still have all the qualities in and amongst the training program, but you might want to pull back on, say, the cardio in this one here. And then the next phase, you keep the cardio where you pulled it back to. You might want to pull back on, say, the bodybuilding stuff, right? Or the plyometric stuff or something like that. And then the next phase after that, we have like a very, very small bout of cardio, very, very small bouts of plyometrics, for example, and then higher bouts of the task that this person is actually trying to achieve. So that's the bottoms up approach. Are there any questions with that one? Justin, have you ever seen something like this before?
Yeah, it sounds very familiar in, like, obviously powerlifting. When you're peaking, you're closer to the actual comp, you start having volume pulled back, reps pulled back and sets so that you're not gassing yourself out, and then just before you have your deload, so you're fully recovered for the actual.
So Justin, your task is say powerlifting, right?
Yeah.
And you want to do cardio, say, for example. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. And what's another thing that you might want to do from a training perspective? Do you want to do some plyometrics? You want to do some bodybuilding?
Yeah, hypertrophy.
Do you want to do
Sort
some
of.
fucking strongman stuff?
Probably.
Do you want to go play a
science.
sport? What's that? What is it?
A bit of bro
stuff.
science. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, the highly variable stuff, the highly variable quality is going to be probably the cardio stuff, right? The non-specific stuff is probably going to be the bodybuilding stuff. Okay. So, you know, if we go back to that integration spectrum, we had like the leg extension on the far left. There's going to be a degree of specificity that, you know, the bodybuilding stuff will translate and transfer across to the powerlifting stuff. But generally speaking, it's pretty far away anyway. So that's going to be the non-specific stuff. So we've got cardio, bodybuilding, and powerlifting, right? In this first phase, it's like we can go full balls to wall and everything. And when I say full balls to wall, I'm not saying like, you know, all the powerlifting you can do in the week, all the bodybuilding, all the cardio, you know, appropriately managed still.
Yeah.
Right. And then we go to the next block and we go, oh, cardio is a bit too high and we're struggling to see, improvements on the powerlifting stuff. Let's just simmer the cardio down a little bit. So you simmer the cardio down. Cool. Run that. Next block. All right. Fucking sweet. We're noticing not much performance being gained in the powerlifting stuff. Let's simmer the cardio down even more. And then let's simmer the bodybuilding stuff even more and keep the powerlifting stuff high. Cool. You know what I mean? And then it's like in this last block here, it's like those other qualities are simmered down heaps and it's just the powerlifting. Right.
Yeah.
That's
so
for your circumstance.
Yeah. So you're pushing towards more specific movement as you go up. You want to keep that high while bringing back the accessories.
Right. Exactly. Cooper, do you have any questions with this?
No.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
What about you, Scotty?
Makes sense.
Makes sense. Have you ever heard anything like this before?
I actually haven't. Not with the bottoms up term. Like I've heard of, kind of phasing and pulling certain things forward and pushing other things back. But yeah, never heard a term for it.
Yeah, cool. So that's pretty much that. This can be, you can dive into this really, really fucking deep. But for now, because Ben's not here, I can't apply it to the circumstance. But hopefully this is definitely something that he can think about. Then he asked, his question then was about volume dosage and how we could actually dose volume during training. Like, Mudge, if I asked you, how would you dose volume during training cycles?
Yeah, I mean, the
If I
things
was
that
to-
come, yeah, the
Right.
things that come into mind are, total sets, total reps, tonnage. Those are like, the first things. I'd also look at how often I'm exposing those knee like patterns. So for example, if it's in a weightlifting context, I include the clean and the snatch as knee volume. I include that as a squat. So I look at my overall program. But yeah, it's very hard unless you have software or things that you're tracking.
what sort of variables do you consider that influence how much volume you put in to training, to person's training?
That would be like, a lot of it would be like, what can they recover from? Like, what's their life like outside of training? How much time do they have to train? All those external factors would probably play a bigger part on how much volume, but it would really just be finding a point on that, I guess, pushing them to a point of where it's like, oh, hang on, I'm feeling pretty cooked. And then it's like, sweet, now we've found a bit of a ceiling. So we're going to sit under that for a decent amount of time and then slowly try and surpass that over time as well.
Okay. Cooper, you got a powerlifter, SBD, right? What sort of things would influence how much volume you prescribe?
Yeah, I guess
I understand this is a fucking hard question because there's a lot of things to go with it, but what would you consider?
I consider what days you're doing your, I guess, your squat and deadlift recovery between those 2 days. Yeah, your reps and sets for each fucking exercise, that sort of stuff.
Right. So the reps and sets is volume.
Yeah.
So there are a few things that I consider, especially from the SBD perspective. Now, Ben was asking for the SBD or the barbell lifts in general. What sort of variables, should you consider when prescribing volume? The first thing I want to talk about is, of course, intensity, right? Intensity is probably going to be the most important variable that I must consider and will consider in my application of volume. Now, if we just take this person right here, this person has a deadlift of 250 kilos, a squat of 200 kilos, and a bench press of 120 kilos. Like, obviously, from this perspective, this is a relatively generalized one. The deadlift is going to be the least amount of volume prescribed. Can anyone tell me why?
Because it's the most taxing.
Why is it taxing?
Because it's more weight on the bar.
Because it's
and
the
more
heaviest.
muscles. Yeah, more muscles engaged.
Right. That's as simple as it needs to be. It's like, what if the squat was heavier than the deadlift? Well, the squat would be up there, right? So the first kind of variable is going to be the intensity variable. Which one of those three lifts is going to be the heaviest? Okay, the heaviest. That one gets the least amount of volume. And then the second, moderate. Third, obviously, the most amount of volume. Cooper, your eyes are probably twitching here. You're going, fuck, why do the bench always get so much volume? We'll answer that soon. That makes like pretty clear sense, Mudge?
Yep, absolutely.
Now you're like, fuck, that's what you meant.
Yeah, frequency. Yeah, makes
right.
sense.
So that's not frequency, it's total volume across the week, right?
But that's why you're kind of exposing them to more bench press.
No. We'll talk about the bench press in a second. This is literally just how much volume should you give the SBD?
Yeah.
How would you break up the volume of the SBD? Well, you can look at it from an intense perspective. Heaviest one least, lightest one most.
Yep.
The next one is going to be training age, right? Justin.
Yeah.
I've got someone who's been powerlifting for 1 year. 1 year. Do we need to break it up like this? Or can we do this?
Oh, you could probably do that. Chuck them all together because they haven't really hit their true maxes.
Maybe they've hit their true maxes for this current point in time, but I think what you're saying there is they haven't reached this, that potential.
Yeah.
Right, that potential, and their potential might be still a little far away. So, generally speaking, someone with a lower training age, I'm not going to really pass out the training volume based on this circumstance. I'm going to pass out training volume based on the training age circumstance. I can't put a number here. Like anyone below the 5 years of training is going to fit here. Below 2 years of training is going to fit here. That's a little bit too hard. But you can look at it from a training age. And generally speaking, someone with a lesser training age can absolutely recover and do more volume. There is very, very little need to ever give them low volume, but also you can give them high volume for sure. But moderate volume, you honestly couldn't go wrong. Does anyone have any questions with that one? Louis, do you see it another way?
No, I see it in the exact same way.
Right. The next variable is going to be skill level, which Mudge was alluding to. Now, for example, Justin, let's just say your bench press, very skilled, right? Like there's only so much more technique that you can dial in for your bench press to make it any bigger. Right now, it's a case of time, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
So if your skill level on the bench press, this can be deadlift or squat, doesn't matter. You could be like, okay, the one that this person has the most amount of confidence in, and they do it the best, they're the most skilled at it, lowest volume. Right? And the one that they're doing the worst, highest volume. Now, of course, this would change from a phase to phase. Of course, it's like, say we broke it up like this, and then we do like, a block or two, or maybe even 3 blocks of squatting at high volume, and we go, man, their squat's improved. Cool. Then we can actually move the squat. Maybe put the deadlift down here, or the bench. We can rotate these. So it wouldn't be like, okay, I'll work with someone and their squat sucks. All right, sweet. From now on, for the rest of time ever that I'm coaching this person, they're going to get high volume squat. No, it doesn't work that way. But it is one way that you can actually pass out volume across the SBD through each training phase or cycle. And then, of course, we've got this one here. And this is probably the hardest one to understand, but it makes the most amount of sense. Has anyone seen John Hack's training regime? Have you, Justin?
No, just the stuff he puts up online. I haven't seen the actual regime.
Right. Does anyone know Jamal Browner? Does anyone know how many times Jamal Browner squat, benches, and deadlifts a week? Based on his Instagram post, you think he fucking deadlifts every single fucking day, but he doesn't. It's like the stronger you are, the more experienced you are, the more elite you are. All of them, fucking all of them, regardless of skill, regardless of intensity, regardless of everything, all of them will get low fucking dosage of volume. Can anyone tell me why?
When you squat, deadlift, and bench over that sort of weight, it doesn't matter which one's lower, you're still going to be fatigued on all of them.
Right. So the sheer amount of accumulated tonnage that you could shift across the 3 lifts here would prove such a a fucking Spartan kicks worth of neural stimulus that it would be really, really hard to recover from should you do moderate to high frequency. Super hard. So it's like the more elite someone gets, they go on low volume. Low volume. It's like dudes that are benching over 250 kilos are benching once a week. Does anyone have any questions with volume dosage? Straightforward. Cool. Cooper.
Yes.
Hit me. Hit us with it.
All right. So I see a lot of people fucking benching every single session, every time they're in the gym. And the reason I always is I'm always benching, I'm going to fucking put more weight on the bar. I'm going to be really good at it. So I just wanted to see your opinion, I guess everyone else's opinion on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've said it before, it's always dangerous to ask for my opinion because I've got many, but Mudge,
Man,
what have you got?
Me and bench press have a
love-hate relationship.
Love-hate relationship. Yeah, I guess I had to learn the hard way as a weightlifter. I got a little bit excited at the start of this year, and I started to include bench presses, I guess, to complement my training. In my head, looked at the anatomy side. A stronger bench might lead to a stronger lockout in the jerk. But what I did find was, in my instant, the bench press is variable. It's not very specific in nature to my movement. And I kind of left it a little bit too late and didn't take that into consideration. And for me, my exposure of twice a week to potentially 3 times a week actually, was one of the factors that kind of led to my elbow injury. And, there was a couple other things that happened. So my current thought pattern is see how much you actually need the bench press, depending on, your sport or what you're doing it for. And then is there other ways of still developing the qualities that you're after, but not having to do the same movement all the time?
So when it comes from bench press frequency, Scotty, do you think people should bench more or less?
Oh man.
Come on, mate. It's not a fucking trick question.
I think it probably relates to that training age. If you're newer, maybe more. If you're more advanced, maybe less.
Would you subscribe to the idea that if you do something more, you'd get better at it?
I think you'd get better at the skill of it.
Yep.
Yes.
Why wouldn't you get better at it though?
I think there's a point of diminishing returns in like volume, because you got to recover from it. So if you're benching 4 times a week, like you'd have to be very mindful of the intensity across those 4 sessions, rather than, you know what I mean? Like as long as you're not doing the same bench press session 4 times a week, then I think it's probably not a bad idea.
Right. Justin, you got a 190 kilo bench. How many times do you train bench?
Twice a week.
And how much volume do you do on bench?
Not much.
Yeah. So you've only got the 2 like competition style benches, or a comp bench and a variant?
Yes, I've got a comp bench and then a variant. So at the moment it's floor press, or another time it might be pin press. And then I've got the other variants of incline dumbbells and that thrown in as well throughout.
Yeah. Okay. So you might have dumbbell pressing and stuff like that, but the only 2 barbell lifts you have are either that one variation and then the comp bench.
What do you dumbbell press?
I've only got 50s.
Only 50s. Yeah. All right, mate. No worries. Cooper, honest question though, man. We just spoke about some pretty important stuff that was relatively simple in nature, which drives a lot of understanding and rationalizing as to if you should do more of this and stuff like that. So from the conversation we've just had about volume dosage and specificity and variability, etc., did any of that give you an insight where you could actually answer this question for yourself?
Yeah, 100%. And from your previous slides, it made sense. You put up like the elite level and the novice, I guess. How elite you are at the lift, what you are lifting, the different variations of the bench press you're doing each session.
Right. So this one here is definitely could be applicable to answer your question, but this one here was primarily talking about volume. Now, of course, to to begin answering this one, I think there's a few things that we kind of want to talk about just real quickly, and that's going to be about stress, right? Anything that we do in the gym is ultimately a stress. It's ultimately a stress. We seek stress and stress is what's called allostatic load. And we seek allostatic load so that then we can recover from it, and it becomes our normalized new balance point, right? So essentially, the more that we challenge ourselves, the more we recover from that, we get a more potential to be challenged even further. The higher the intensity, the higher the threat. So when I say threat, what am I referring to, Mudge?
When you're referring to as in threat, what do you mean?
Like, so intensity, I'm saying the higher the intensity on a barbell, the higher the threat. What am I implying when I say threat?
So the threat to fatigue, the higher load?
It is a threat to fatigue,
so it's a greater risk.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, I've never thought of like the threat.
Right.
I've never thought about that.
Because at the end of the day, we can dial all of this shit down to fucking stress, and we can dial it down to homeostatic or allostatic. Right. You don't need to know those words for now. Let me explain. The higher the intensity, the higher the threat. The threat, right, is your nervous system entering a sympathetic state. Right? Do you know what the fight or flight state is, Coops? The fight or flight state.
What?
Or freeze.
All right. So the fight or flight state is often referred to like this. You're a fucking homo. Who came before Homo sapiens? Now, who came before Homo sapiens?
Oh, God.
Scotty, who came before Homo sapiens, mate? You're the smart one here.
No way, man.
Ah,
Neanderthals.
whatever. Coops. You know what? We'll go Homo sapiens. 100,000 years ago, they're in the savannah in Africa. There is a tiger. It's chasing them. What are they doing?
Running.
For their fucking life, right? Do you think they're chilling out, or do you think they're going balls to the wall?
Yeah, balls to the wall, yeah.
Do you think their heart cares if it's pumping blood to the organs, or does it care more about pumping bloods to the muscles?
Muscles.
Do you think the heart cares about long, slow, controlled breaths, or really, really shallow, fast ones?
Shallow, fast.
So does this mean the heart beats faster?
Yeah.
Does the brain care about what they're going to eat for dinner that night? No. They are in a very, very high state of sympathetic tone. Right? The higher the intensity, the higher the threat, the higher the sympathetic tone. We talk about volume, or we talk about fatigue from training the SBD. Fatigue is because we've spent so much in a sympathetic state with a heavy barbell in our hands on our back. Right? Every rep, every set, the accumulation of those things over time adds up to a lot of stress, a lot of sympathetic tone, a lot of time spent in sympathetic state, a lot of fatigue, right? So intensity has a high threat. So Coops, when you've got 140 kilos in your hands on a bench press, do you care about what you're having for dinner?
No.
No. Do you care about chilling out, bro, relaxing?
No, not at
No,
all.
you're fucking there. You are zoned in like a hawk on a fucking hare, right? So the threat is high. The fatigue or the response, right? The response that the body goes through physiologically, like on the internal side, shit that we can't see, feel, or hear. The response that the body goes through to the threat has a high return of fatigue, like I was just talking about, right? As a result of the intensity being high and the fatigue subsequently being high as well, how often do you think we can repeat those things? Do you think that fucking Homo sapien 100,000 years ago could run for 50 kilometers at that rate? No. Do you think he could do it in the morning and then again at lunchtime, then again at nighttime? No. So we then have something called the repeated bout effect. But essentially, we're talking about, the exhaustion that comes because of these two things being so high means that repeatability is low. So the heavier the bench press, the more threat. The more threat, the more fatigue comes with it. The more fatigue comes with it, the less repeatability. So that goes back to the elite status thing here. It's like threat high, response high, repeatability fucking low. If someone who's not very skilled, if they're really, really skilled on the bench press, threat high or low?
Low.
Low. Response?
Low.
Low. Repeatability?
Low.
Very often high.
Potentially. Training age. If someone who's only been training for like a year or two, is the threat, response, and exhaustion high or low?
High.
What's high? The threat?
Yeah.
Okay, potentially. What else is high? The fatigue?
No, I'd say the fatigue would be low.
The fatigue could be low because the intensity could be low. So the threat is actually kind of low. The threat's kind of low. The fatigue is kind of low, and the repeatability is, in fact, like pretty repeatable. And that's why they belong in the moderate one, not in the low dose. They can actually handle a lot of it. The reason why they can't handle more of it is because it might be a little bit too much, a little bit too overreaching, right? So can you see how that works, Coops?
Yeah.
So this is one thing that sits at the forefront of my mind whenever I'm programming a bench press to someone. I think, fuck, all of these things. I don't think about these individually. At this point, it's just a part of my process. But that's the thought process. So if we have like 100 kilo bencher, which is not you, or anyone else here, actually, Mudge, how much can you bench?
115, mate.
Well, what about you, Scotty? How much do you bench, mate?
150.
Fucking hell, not bad. So we've got a 100 kilo bencher, low skill, low threat, low response, high frequency. Right. So for example, someone like Victoria, your partner, she can probably bench press higher. depending. If you get a lot of external stresses from work, nutrition, hydration, sleep, sickness, as you noticed, frequency will in turn drop significantly. So we can't forget about those things. Whenever we look at applying volume, applying frequency, applying intensity, if we do that without sparing a fucking thought to the job that Justin has, how many hours he's working, his financial circumstance, are him and his partner having a good time or not? Is he fed? If we apply all these things without even considering or anticipating what those things are going to look like, we could be putting this person in a place of not much return. If we've got 150 kilo benches, we've got Scotty here. So we've got Scotty with the moderate skill. Can you guys hear that?
No.
Oh my God.
No.
Siri just started talking to me when I said Scotty. Scotty, are you Siri?
No.
That was wild.
Oh, yes.
Siri just told me she found something on you. Anyways, we've got Scotty, 150 kilo bencher, moderate skill, moderate threat, moderate response, moderate frequency. Pretty neat, right? And then we've got a 200 kilo bencher, of course.
Not yet.
Not, not yet. So yeah. So does that help answer that one, Coops?
Yeah.
So next time that, are you thinking about a particular person at the gym who you're like, fuck, why do you bench all the time?
Yeah. There's a few at the gym.
And when you ask them, they just go, oh, because you get better at it.
Yeah.
And are you going to tell them any of this?
Some of them don't like to take on advice.
No, right.
Experiences.
Right. And this is the whole point of individualizing training to a degree. It's like you can go and do training from an app or a program that you can buy and stuff like that, but it unfortunately doesn't cater to this sort of stuff, right? Whereas individualized training should cater to all these sort of things for them to make sense. So essentially the application, what there looks like from a frequency perspective for the bench press, Cooper, we've got the bench press. Do they have more skill at the bench press? If yes, then we disperse the volume and we do a higher frequency. Sorry, if they need more skill. If they need more skill, I'm not going to do 10 set. Say we're giving someone 10 sets of bench press. That's quite high, but just say we're giving this person 10 sets of bench press. And there's someone who low training age, low skill, and they need more of it essentially. We're not going to do, here's one bench day with all 10 sets, right? We're going to go, here's 4 bench days. 2 of them are going to have 2 sets each, and 2 of them are going to have 3 sets each. Or we might even go, one of them is going to have 4 sets, one's going to have 3 sets, the other one's going to have 2 sets or 1 set, and another one's going to have 1 set. You can just manage it many different ways. Alternatively, if they need less skill development, then we can congregate the volume. If they need less skill, they need less volume. If they need less skill, they need less volume, right?
Yeah.
So what we can actually afford, because they need less skill, they need less volume, that just means that we can probably have a lower frequency. So we can actually get, the actual bench work done in about 2 or 3 sets on one session, So that's that one. I believe Scotty left. What did he say? Or did he just leave? Oh, yeah, cool. Scotty's actually got work to do, unlike all of us. Cooper.
Yes.
What's the takeaway?
So if you're elite, you're bench less frequent, I guess. If you're novice, you spread out the volume, bench more often.
Cool.
Yeah.
Happy with that?
Yeah. 100%.
What about you, Justin? Any questions or any of that, man?
I think I'm not elite. I need more bench days.
Yeah, fair call. I'll probably say that you are bordering intermediate to advanced. Absolutely.
I'd much prefer 4 days.
Of benching.
Yeah, we'll drop out the squats.
100%. Fuck the squats right off, man. Fuck them right off. So we'll just there's no more slide. This is the final slide. So we've got obviously your question here, Justin. So I purposely asked Aiden to actually come onto this call so that he could dish out a much better response than what I could. I do like conditioning. I am very, very well into it, and I do program a lot of conditioning for my clients. But I absolutely stand on the shoulders of the lads that I work with, Louis and Mudge in particular. They absolutely lead the way when it comes to conditioning, energetics, cardio, and all that sort of shit. Essentially, how I think and how I view things and how I employ things is, like I said, built on the things that they've showed me and taught me, essentially. So, Mudge and I had a bit of conversation about you doing cardio and what that might look like for a strength athlete, where to begin, all that sort of stuff. So we'll just have a conversation here and we'll see if we can actually, do some good stuff for you. Let me just stop sharing my screen and we are back. So, do you have any context that you want to add to that, Justin?
No, I don't really know too much about conditioning and that. I obviously don't do any except for my 10,000 steps.
Yeah,
that's about all.
All right. Well, I'll let you guys, kind of start it. Justin, you can just ask Mudge what you're thinking. Don't be afraid to talk about like what your current understanding or viewpoint of conditioning or cardio actually is as well.
Yeah.
Take it away.
Well, what would be so?
Fucking hell, Justin, you're making me nervous, mate.
Yeah, well, for a strength athlete, something that's gonna like being conditioning and cardio, that's gonna sort of integrate into the movement patterns for a power lifter. If you know what I mean.
Powerlifter. Yeah, I know exactly. It's probably, honestly, this is probably one of the biggest problems that we tend to solve here at Roba is we get people that are either, freakishly strong or they're strong. They want to introduce some conditioning and they're afraid that their gains are going to basically lost. They're going to lose their strength. They're going to lose their muscle, all those kinds of things. My first thought pattern and the way I think about conditioning is I break it down into 3 types of conditioning. And, Louis left the call. He has a little bit more in-depth knowledge because this is his kind of bag, but I tend to bridge the gap and I also like and understand these things. So 3 types of conditioning. It's going to sound like I'm fucking having sex, but long and slow, difficult but repeatable, hard and fast, right? So those are your 3 types of conditioning, and I'll break those down and give you examples for that kind of stuff. So long and slow conditioning is where your heart rate is lower. So I usually use a talk test. So I'm able to maintain a conversation where I'm doing these kinds of movements. And generally those are movements that I might, do you have like a salt bike or a rower or anything like that at your gym?
No, I've got a treadmill.
Treadmill, yeah, treadmill could be used, right?
Yeah.
Like a weighted walk of some sort. That could be considered long and slow. We generally like to mix up those kinds of things with movements such as carries and stuff. So one of the big things when we think about conditioning is exercise selection, the actual exercises that you choose, right? That's your first thing that you can think about for conditioning. The difficult but repeatable stuff is now our heart rate is a little bit harder. We're probably working, if I was to give you a talk test, you're probably just able to maintain a conversation with sentences. So that's kind of the effort that you're kind of going at, like a 7 out of 10, right? Difficult but repeatable. And then hard and fast is something that is like an all-out effort. If you had an assault bike or a sprint, it could be something like, sending a boxing bag hard and fast for like 10 seconds, as much as you can. So 3 types of conditioning there. Now, just like that strength training, right? If I do sets of, singles, doubles, triples for a back squat, I know the next day I'm probably not going to be able to back it up with doubles, singles, triples, right? Like the same intensity. Right?
Yeah, recovery time.
Yeah, recovery time. So you need, for that movement, you might need 48 hours, you might need 72 hours, depending on what just Dennis said, your level and your exposure. Hypertrophy, you could probably get away with potentially a shorter window for hypertrophy, right? The pumpy stuff. You could probably back it up the next day. It depends on what your movements are. The thing when we think about conditioning is it's the same effect. So if I do the hard and fast stuff, it's really intense. And Dennis talks about this, which I like, is we call it similar. So similar, dissimilar. So similar is movements that you're very much used to using a lot of tension, right? And dissimilar would be things that you're probably not used to. So if I gave you a, say like a slam ball, and I made you go like hard out 30-second effort with a slam ball, I'd make you do 5 rounds of that. The next day you'd be okay because you're somewhat recovered. If I gave you a, say, 5-minute walk, or sorry, 5-minute run on the treadmill, I guarantee the next day you'd be sore because you're not used to that kind of movement. It's not very similar in nature. So as a strength athlete, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
So when I think about conditioning now, if I'm going to add conditioning for, say, yourself, I'm going to start with the things that you're very much similar and you're used to. But the exercise selection, I'm going to be very careful with. So if you've got a sled, perfect. I'm going to fucking put you on a sled. I'm going to make you go 20 seconds on, go hard, then rest for about 10 seconds or so, and make you repeat it for 5 times. The reason I like a sled is a sled doesn't have a eccentric portion to the movement. So eccentric, think of like if you were to do a deadlift or an RDL, you'd slow the negative down. And that's like a, you'd feel that soreness the more the next day. So I'd use movements that you're very much similar in. And the dose that I'd give you would be starting out small and just exposing you to those kinds of conditioning. I'm also going to
say sled,
sorry. Yeah.
Do you mean like sled runs or like pulls?
Sled runs are fine. You can also mix it up and do sled pulls. And you might do a, say, sled push, sled pull, and then do, say, a farmer's carry with kettlebells. So that would be, so now that you can see there's exercise, and all those exercises that I'm choosing are very global in nature. What that means is you're using a lot of muscles, but there's no single area that you're pumping a lot of blood to. If I was to give you burpees, your biceps, your triceps, your upper body would be probably more sore because you're getting a lot of blood flow pumped in that area, right?
I think I fell asleep after 2.
Yeah. yeah. So thinking back to those 3 things that I used, you've got long and slow. I generally go off like time. So with that, if I'm going to get better over time, I'm going to start with like 10 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever you can, long and slow, and build over time. So over the coming weeks, I increase that by time. I don't think about increasing reps or sets or anything like that. I just use time because it's easy to control. This week I want 15 minutes at an effort where I can maintain a conversation. And then the next week let's go 20 minutes, an effort where I can maintain a conversation. Those difficult, repeatable stuff, when I'm using those kinds of things, I want to make sure that you've got an equal amount of rest to what you're working. So generally you start to recover and you can maintain your efforts. That's why it's called difficult. It's somewhat hard and you get a bit of a stress, but you're also resting. So that could be like, I use a format of alternating EMOMs. So alternating EMOMs is like minute 1, I'm going to do sled push up and back. Minute 2, I'm going to do a farmer's carry. Minute 3, I'm just going to do a slight jog on the treadmill. And then I'm going to repeat that for 9 minutes. So I start back up, sled, push up and down, the next minute, the carry, the next minute, the run. That's for about 9 minutes.
So running it as a circuit with no rest.
Pretty much, right? But what I'm selecting there is I'm still giving an opportunity to somewhat recover. So you know how I explained there when I did
you're going upper body, lower body.
Yeah.
So that your legs are going to get a rest when you're doing the upper body side of it. And then when you go back to the leg side, upper body's getting a rest.
Perfect. So that's what we call, difficult, repeatable. But yeah, like you said, not pulling a lot of blood into the one area. So that's difficult and repeatable. And then that last stuff, the hard and fast, you're very much used to the hard and fast. That could be like Dennis did a good post before where he had a tire and then he had a hammer. And then he was sledgehammer, basically hammering that hard for about 10 seconds, then resting 30 seconds or so and repeating that until basically his effort started to decrease. So that is things that he's used to, very high tension. And again, anything that we've spoken about here, it's like you'd spread those things throughout your program. Being that you're coming closer and closer to a prep, I'm going to expose you less and less to those types of conditioning because for me personally, I know that there's a fatigue factor. Just like we spoke about strength training and hypertrophy and those types of like training, there's a fatigue factor that carries on. And if I do choose it, I'm going to select it, say, for example, on, I've done my main session 1, session 2, and then the third session, I know I'm going to rest the next day. I might do a cardio sesh, rest the next day, and then back to my, squat day, bench day, that kind of
Yeah.
thing, if I do it that fast. So the big thing is what we spoke about. When I want variability in off season, I'm going to include more and more conditioning. And I know that Dennis asked me about variability. One of the reasons that I think of variability as it's a psychological break. Right now I'm in off season and I'm fucking running. I haven't ran in a year. I'm going through some pain, but I'm also enjoying that effect because I haven't done it for a while. But as I get closer and closer to comp prep, which for me is not till next year, November, I start to remove conditioning more and more because I understand that if I try to do conditioning and lifting and I'm in a deficit, my output is going to be affected. And I thought I was immune to it, but I found, 2 dosages of that long and slow stuff interspread with my lifting had an effect on my lifting. I wasn't able to take out those higher intensities.
So,
Yeah.
So we've got Justin now. Would you say Justin 11 weeks out?
Yeah, 10 weeks.
All right. So we've got Justin at 10 weeks out, which means that Justin is in comp prep. SBD is only going to rise from here from an intensity perspective. Did you guys just hear me when I was talking?
Yeah.
Sorry, my microphone was so far away. SBD is going to rise in intensity and perhaps even volume to a degree. So he's 10 weeks out of prep and he wants to do a bit of cardio. Justin, do you want to do cardio just for health reasons, like your 10K steps kind of thing?
Bit of both. I got bloods back and my cholesterol's a little bit high. So it will help with that. And I get gassed out trying to tie my shoe up. So
right. So there's a degree of like wanting to feel a little bit better about life and yourself in general, but it cannot interfere with SBD.
Yeah.
And it needs to contribute to you losing a bit more calories, right? Wait.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're in prep. We're 10 weeks out. We want to do cardio, not just for health. We literally want to do it to actually get a little bit more improvements from cardiovascular perspective. And it cannot affect SBD. So Mudge, where do we start? What would we do and how much will we dose it? Justin, do you want to walk on the treadmill for 5 minutes every single day?
It gets a bit boring, but I like a bit of variety.
Yeah.
Right. And if we were to do something like the treadmill, for example, we can do 5 minutes a day, but at some stage we need to, and if we want to improve cardiopulmonary ability, that 5 minutes needs to go from 5 minutes to like 40 minutes in a few weeks. Do you want to sit on the treadmill for 40 minutes?
No, that'd be a bit boring.
Right. So this is when powerlifters always talk about zone 2, this and that. It's like, you increase zone 2 via volume, right? Like if you want to actually get some sort of return benefit on that thing. Yeah. If you just keep doing 10 minutes every single time you do it, you're not really being exposed to much of a challenge, right?
Yeah, you adapt to it.
Right. It's like you're doing 3 sets of 3 at 150 kilo bench press for the rest of your life. You're not going to get anywhere, right?
Yeah.
So, Mudge, where do we go?
Cool. What equipment do we have available to us? And when I say equipment, do you have dead balls, kettlebells, yokes, anything like any strongman equipment, anything like that?
Dumbbells, treadmill, farmer carries.
Mm-hmm.
I can get a sled. I think that's about it. Weighted vest.
Yeah, so I would start, a weighted vest walk would help a little bit more because you're trying to run so I'll quickly explain to you because it's very good to know. People will be like, have you heard the term of like aerobic? They say aerobic, anaerobic. Have you heard of those terms? Yeah. So, aerobic's meant to be with oxygen, anaerobic without oxygen. Now, we actually did this experiment at Rover. Louis got this fancy gizmo. It's called a infrared. Sorry, a Moxie. So Moxie, the way it measures is essentially it's like an infrared and it measures how much hemoglobin is in your blood. Essentially it tells you how much oxygen is present at the muscle. Right. Cool. So now me and him went for a run. We both went for a 5-minute run. That's meant to be aerobic. So for me, a 5-minute run would be, a very easy effort. I could maintain a conversation next to you. Louis also went for that run. And when we came back after that run, we did it in turns. We measured our levels, right? How much oxygen was present in the actual muscle, right? Now, being aerobic, that means oxygen should be present because you're using oxygen as your major energy source. If you're anaerobic, that means you should be really good at taking up all the oxygen and not being there. But we chose the domain of running and aerobic, right? Who do you think at the end of it had more oxygen present in their muscles? Me my sport is weightlifting, similar to powerlifting, very strength orientated. Louis is a CrossFitter. He's very much energetics based, a lot of conditioning kind of stuff. Who do you think had more oxygen present in their muscles, me or him?
I'd say you.
It was Louis. So all my oxygen had been used up because I am so good at producing force and power. I'm so good at using all that oxygen. Whereas Louis had oxygen present there because he was actually aerobic as he was running. And so the funny thing is, a lot of people, you know, what Dennis referred to in the powerlifting community and such, you know, they're promoting running and lifting, and they're wondering why their lifting is going down, how it has an effect on that. But all that means is when I'm actually trying to be aerobic, I'm not aerobic because I'm so good at my task that actually interferes with my running. And you probably describe it. If you've gone for a run, have you ever had that feeling of heaviness in your legs?
Yeah. You
Yeah.
get
So
like a full pump in
yeah.
the calves and yeah.
Yeah, so that's your body being so good at using oxygen, not what we want on aerobic. So that's why I said, have you got a weight vest? Cool. A weight vest with a fast-paced walk with an incline is going to help us get into that actual zone that we're after, what, you know, we'd call zone 2. So that's why I said exercise selection is very important. So with you, I would go with, I want you to do a weighted, so you could use different formats, but easiest format that I'd use would be 5 rounds of 5 minutes of a weighted vest walk. I'd get off that, and then I'll do 10 no push-up burpees. So that's just literally a like up down where you drop down and then come back up, right? You're not actually doing the push-up, because if we do a push-up, we're starting to pull blood into that area, and you're probably going to be sore the next day. And then next, I'll go to a carry. So you had some farmer's handles, and I'd go moderate weight. The idea is, if we don't want to get it too heavy, because if it's too heavy, we pull a lot of blood in that area, and next day your forearms are going to be sore, and it might affect another session. So something like a moderate weight would be like, if you had kettlebells, I'd use between 24s, 28 kettlebells on each side, 80-meter walk, up, back, come back down, and then I'll do 10 air squats with a 3-second breath at the top. Right, so I'd squat, come up, breathe for 3 seconds, then back down, and then I'd probably if I had another type of equipment that I could carry, I might do a dead ball walk, right, or a sled push, something that I can move again, going back to the legs, and then I'd repeat that for 5 rounds. And the pace that I'm looking at, if you had a heart rate monitor or a watch, you'd be trying to aim for between 140 and 160 beats per minute. If you don't have a heart rate monitor, just go for the talk test. You should be able to maintain a conversation with someone, and even just do it. If you have someone in the gym, just be like, hey, how you going and stuff. And if you're starting to get out of breath, you have to slow down, because one of the big things we see when we incorporate these types of session is you quickly lose your breath and you work harder than you need to. And the effort is a lot less than you think. And something like that, you do 5 rounds, beautiful, nice and easy thing. You could repeat that for a couple of weeks. You start to get bored of that. And all you do is if you had a bike, it would be perfect. So instead of the treadmill, you jump on a bike, and then for the carry, you might do an offset carry. 1 kettlebell at the front, 1 kettlebell by the side, something a little bit more interesting. But you can see all those movements that we're selecting are things that are global in nature, and they're not going to pull a lot of blood in that area. Would that kind of help you?
Yeah.
And then you'd see how you feel the next day, because even those burpees could potentially have you sore the next day. So if that is fucking kind of creating that soreness, then we would look at even choosing a movement that's even less more restrictive in that nature. But generally, from my experience with strength athletes, a no push-up burpee is actually not too bad, and it doesn't really cause them much soreness.
Yeah.
Obviously, Justin, you can I don't know what Matt knows about conditioning and if he does much cardio stuff.
No.
Yeah, so it's like, if you can't actually ask him for it, then obviously you could just add it on top of your training. But just like every other training variable that we program, the SBD alike, we got to manage these things and look at them. You know what I mean? Like we're just saying, here, Justin, here's 4 exercises, do a 5-minute round 5 times. That could present as like, fuck me dead, man. Like my shoulders are cooked and I got a bench tomorrow. Fuck. What do we do? No push-up burpee. Fuck. Get rid of that. Don't ever do that again. Do something. You know what I mean? Like you've got to manage it too.
Yeah.
Right. So that was a lot of information for you, Justin. Did that?
I took most of it in.
Yeah. Just remember the 3 things we said: long and slow, difficult but repeatable, hard and fast. Hard and fast is like a spectrum. It's very close to what you're used to, a lot of tension. On the other end of the spectrums, things that you're not really used to. I'll use Dennis's terminology and I think it's perfect. Dissimilar is things that you're probably not used to and you don't do a lot of. Similar is things that are very much a lot of tension related into that area. You know, everything that you do in your day-to-day stuff, the SBD is generally, it is high tension. Whereas, you know, carries, you know, I like, for example, I'll give you the part of my prep for my going into last 6 weeks before my nationals for weightlifting. I chose the bike erg. And so the things that I used was I started off with 15 minutes on the bike erg and I had a heart rate monitor, but every now and then I didn't have a heart rate monitor. So I just used the torque test. And I built up to a point where I could do honestly 10 minutes and the next day I was fine. 15 minutes, I was fine. I got a bit bored of the bike. And then I went into literally what we just spoke about. I was like, all right, I'm going to do 3 rounds of 2 minutes on the bike, 80 meters of a carry, like a dead ball carry, something nice and light. 10 no push-up burpees. I had some like core stuff where I literally just did like mountain climbers. And the mountain climbers was just a nice slow tempo pace. And I'm used familiar with that movement. So I wasn't going to be sore the next day. And then I repeated that for 5 rounds. Once I got bored of that, all I varied was the carry to another type of carry. And then the core exercise to another type of carry core exercise. So I did a kettlebell suitcase carry, and that was perfect enough. I used straps because I needed my fucking grip, and all I cared about was making sure that my obliques were working when I did the suitcase carry. And so that's a strategy that you can use straps, right? When you need your grip for the movements that you do, cool. Let's use straps because we don't care about our grip. Our grip is strong enough for the exercise we're doing. All we're thinking about is making sure the movement is relatively global in nature, uses multiple muscles, and I'm moving.
Yeah.
I always say, Justin, I say the thing that is most dissimilar is most fatiguing. So in your prep, you know, for a long time, when was the last time you squatted over 10 reps? Right. So long ago you can't remember.
2 years maybe.
All right, cool. Sweet. And now we're going to start doing, you know, we're going to do 4 sets 10, 4 sets 15 on squats. You're going to get beat up or what, man?
Yeah.
It's going to be light as shit. It's going to be light as shit, but the sheer volume, the sheer difference between 4 sets 15 on a squat and 3x3 is so immense that it will fuck you up, right? It will fatigue you because it's mostly similar. But you do that for 2 months, guess what happens? Not even 2 months. You do that for a month and you're groovy, man. It's not fatiguing. Now it becomes similar. It starts to change what I call the physiological signature. And our physiological signature is like lift SBD, fuck all reps, heavy loads, hard contractions, right? So if we then go and do zone 2 cardio and we just, you know, go for an easy 20-minute run or a 30-minute row straight off the bat 3 times a week, it's so dissimilar. You're going to go into do SBD and you're not going to have the horsepower that you thought you were going to have, right? That's my perspective. It was like, yeah, sweet, let's do conditioning. We'll do heaps of it, but I'll do it in a way that I want to protect this person's ability to do SBD still at a high degree. So,
yeah, and if you're ever curious, like just ask one of us if you want ideas for exercises, or you know you might be thinking, because it's also a bit of playtime in the sense that you know you choose a certain exercise. Like I know I've done. Like I remember doing the yoke carry because in my mind I was like, "Oh, cool! This is yoke carry." I was like, "This is relatively global nature. My whole body's moving." But even that, just the yoke itself was heavy enough to load my back, and I could feel it, you know, the next day. And I was like, "All right, cool. Maybe I got a little bit too excited. Let's change the yoke for something else." You know, because I thought, you know, it's very similar, but I also looked at, you know, what the cost was, and your body will tell you pretty quickly what you feel like.
Ask Matt if he can help you. If Matt can't help you, then just be like, yo, can I reach out to Dennis if he's okay with that?
I've hit him up. I hit him up before about I wanted to do conditioning.
Yeah.
And he suggested to talk to you because you know a lot more about conditioning than he does.
All right. Well, in that case, man, we'll just reach out, or even if you want, you can reach out to Morge and Morge can reach out to you, and you guys can just formulate something for the next few weeks. Play with it, trial it, man. Like Morge said at the end, bro, this is meant to be fun. If you're doing conditioning and you're going, fuck, I hate this. This is fucking awful garbage. Fuck it off. Let's change it up, do something different so it's fun.
Yeah.
Because like our intention is to give you conditioning without it fucking up with your SBD.
Yeah.
But to help you improve being able to tie your shoelaces up without getting huffed and puffed and have some sort of positive influence on losing weight as well. All right.
Yeah.